everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald, my chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. And I am joined today by the dynamic duo, the sidekicks themselves. I have on the line with me Daniel, Skjold, Pedersen, and Asger Harding Granerud. Did I pronounce those names right, guys?
That was very good.
Okay, good. All right, I'm relieved. That's always the hardest thing, you know. There's always a scheduling issue of, you know, coming from Alaska and then going over into Europe, and then there's the issues of, like, accents and language barriers. You know, we can get beyond most of that, but it's the pronunciations of the name where if I even dared pronouncing it as clear as you would, then I would just fall flat on my face, and it would be embarrassing for all of us. So I think we're off to a good start with my Americanized pronunciations here.
Yeah, it was good. It was perfect.
Okay.
And thanks for having us.
Yeah. Well, this is really exciting. So, first off, you guys seem like an unstoppable machine of board game production. You've both accomplished as independent designers many publications. You know, at this point you've co-designed a bunch of games. You have a bunch of games coming out here in the United States that have already released in Europe, and you got tons of stuff that's on the horizon. You know, we got A Tale of Pirates, and then there's also this mysterious dungeon crawl game that you might be working on, and we'll get to all that. But first, I want to know, like, what's the sidekick thing? Because you guys present as Sidekick Asger and Sidekick Daniel. Is that like your guys' game studio, or like who are you guys, and what's up with the sidekick thing?
Daniel?
I think the name started a few years back when we were actually in Copenhagen playtesting some of our games, and I believe it was Asger who came up with the sidekick idea. So it was started probably just as kind of a joke on the side, but just saying, okay, so who was actually, when we're making games together, people often ask us who came up with the idea initially, whose game is it? And it's not something we think about a lot, but I think Asger's response was that it was his idea, and I was a sidekick.
Okay.
So I think that's how it started. The story started. So the story was right, but the idea was probably mine for the game we were playing.
You're each other's sidekicks. I love it. It's adorable.
Exactly. That's the idea. And we're not a game studio per se, but we are us two, and we design games and we send them out to publishers, and we do share a company called Sidekick Games. That's the story about Sidekick.
Okay, well that's a great way of viewing yourselves, of having like this mutual relationship where you're supporting one another and no one person is more important than another, but you're also recognizing kind of where things are coming from, and that one person may have the genesis of an idea, and then it's co-developed and co-designed.
Exactly. I think actually, so though the name started as a joke, I think I can say that we've attached a lot of meaning to it over the years. Actually thinking about sidekicks, it kind of makes sense for us. Like you say, we are working on an equal footing on the games, but we don't see ourselves as superheroes of the game. The superhero is the game, and the superhero is all the playtesters and the people who play and enjoy our games. And so when we don't make the games for ourselves, we kind of make them for our superheroes, the people who surround us and help us actually making the game. So there's a lot of meaning kind of attached to it that makes sense for us outside of just the fun sidekick moniker that started.
Yeah, well, speaking of superheroes then, we better get to the origin story of these two sidekicks. So how long have you two known each other, and how did you meet?
I think we started designing games together when we went to Essen 5 years ago in 2013. but we met before that. We're actually climbing buddies. We do bouldering, which is sort of climbing, indoor climbing.
Yeah.
In Copenhagen, and that's how we met. Acquaintances of acquaintances of acquaintances, and suddenly we were climbing together. It became a regular thing with a bigger group, and we were meeting twice a week, etc. And then we discovered we both had a passion for board games. We decided to take a chance, make some of them, go to Essen, pitch them, and each of us, on the back of that Essen, in the half a year or so after that, sold one independent design. And since then, we since the drive home, we started the design. It took 13 hours to drive home from Essen to Copenhagen. And on that trip, we made the first iteration of 13 Days, which is our first co-design. And since then, we have designed everything together.
So was one of those initially pitched? Was that Flamme Rouge?
Yes, I pitched Flamme Rouge, and Daniel pitched Gold Fever, which is the game that Tom Bassel hates, which is also out in the US market now, which was They're
both carried in the US by Stronghold Games currently.
Right, which a lot of your games are. Like, I was noticing that in the lineup, that there definitely seems to be a bias towards Stronghold Games as far as publishing your stuff. But then again, I know that Stephen Bonacore is hungry to get as many euros into the American market as he can. It's definitely been a successful thing for him. And,
Sure.
Like, you guys have some awesome games on his lineup, but also, I mean, Blue Orange Games has Panic Mansion, or Shaky Manor here in the United States. And that's really cool that you're kind of breaking into this market. But, I mean, that is a fantastic story for the origin that your guys' meeting, as far as an entirely separate sport, an entirely separate hobby even, and you decide to start making games, and you kind of uplifted one another in order to actually bring them to Essen, get them sold, and then start making games together.
Yep. That's more or less it.
Wow. I mean, at that point, did you think that, after this first Essen, it's going to be smooth sailing? You guys are pros at this point. You're never going to have to worry about, am I going to get this game sold again? Because you each had a game sold at that point.
No. The reality is that it often takes very, very long time to actually have these games released. And Gold Fever, even Daniel's game, was delayed another year from Flamme Rouge, even more so. So it can be a long process, and even when you have signed something, you don't know how people are going to receive it. Are they going to like it? Is it being reprinted, etc.? I often say that game designing and enjoying this is like a series of waiting for what is next. And it's not to say that you can't be happy when you signed a game, but is that really when you should be happy? Because we also have games cancelled that have been signed. Or should you be happy when it's released into stores, or are you happy when it's when it gets a good review, or when it gets a reprint, or etc.? It's like it's an unclear boundary of when success is actually achieved. And that's not to say that it's not always a success to get something signed and published. It is always a success.
But I think I would say going to our first Essen 5 years ago was definitely a success. For me personally, growing into being a game designer, I'd been working a few years with a few game ideas, but nothing really serious at that point. But then deciding to actually go to Essen and pitch and meet publishers and trying to take a professional approach and see what could come of it was kind of the most important step along the line of actually becoming a game designer, a real game designer, I think.
What were your two's careers up until that point, or possibly even still going on right now? What's your professional careers outside of game design?
I have a background in political science from the university. I've been working for the government a bit, and I did that when I started making games just in my spare time. And so that's kind of my background into it. I figured it really did. There were a lot of things about that work that was interesting, but also that I didn't have enough control of what I was doing and enough actual physical output from political processes and politics. And so I was always looking for something different. And then games came along. I can't really explain how and why that happened, but it kind of just happened and made sense suddenly. And that came kind of out of the blue. But looking back, I can see some of why I may end up in this business. But it wasn't really planned for it. I didn't study for it. I didn't strategize and plan my career for actually being a game designer. But here I am.
I don't think many people do. Like, I imagine most people kind of stumble into it, get a hit, and then are able to successively use that as a springboard to continue their gaming profession. But I don't think that many people set forth, like, you know, some kids are so focused on, when I grow up, I'm going to be a rock star or an astronaut or a veterinarian or, you know, whatever it is, they are very focused and they study at it. I don't think that there's many people, even as teenagers or young adults, that are viewing game design as a viable career that you could spend a lot of time investing in. And it seems like, from my experience of talking to so many designers up until this point, I was working a career and it was okay, but my real passion was games, and I decided to make a design. I pitched it. It was successful, or it got rejected like 15 times. And then eventually one got successful. And then I was able to transition eventually into a full-time career of game development. And if you've been able to do that at this point, man, you know, that's the dream for so many people. That's awesome.
I think you're correct about finding your passion. That's important, right? Because what really gets you up in the morning and wants you to achieve something. And I definitely found that in board games. So that's important. Also, I think it's about taking the opportunities to come to you. And I didn't plan for this opportunity to be there, but it kind of just happened as well. But I was that kid you talked about, being a young kid and wanted to grow up being a professional football player, or as you would say, soccer player. So I was that kid for many years. So I was studying on the side. I went to college, university, but actually I was that kid. So when that dream didn't materialize, I had to figure out something other to do. And I always thought, well, I had the school, I was fine with the university, but it really didn't click with me until I at some point found board games and that entire business. So it's kind of odd thinking back.
Yeah.
Asger, you go.
Sure. First, I'd say that yes, it is awesome being able to actually design board games. As Daniel says, it means that you have that. It's something I have a passion for, and Daniel has a passion for. So when we meet 9 o'clock Monday morning, it's not like, ooh, so sad to be at work, right?
Yeah, totally.
Secondly, I just want to add to Daniel's story about himself. When he says that he was that kid with the soccer dream, we should add that he actually played as a pro soccer player for a few years. So he did get part of the dream.
Whoa!
Exactly. Myself, like Daniel, I have a master's in political science, development studies, which I don't use for much, and which I, at the end of my university, I had some internships here and there, and I actually found out that it wasn't what I wanted to do. So when I finished, I got a job in a serious game studio, which may specifically what I'm work most with was change management, but using a game as the facilitating tool to use it as a consultancy for other bigger companies.
Oh, that's really that's interesting stuff, actually.
I think it's a growing market, and I think it has big potential. But a few years doing that company I worked for actually went bust, and it started again. But I took the opportunity to do something else, and I went and was asked to start a distribution company distributing board games in Denmark and Sweden. So I did that for 3.5 years, and also part of that was also that we opened physical board game store, friendly local game store in a shopping mall in Copenhagen.
What's the name of the store?
It's called Spilbræt, which is game board. It's also the name of the distributor, but it's the name in the. They're actually two separate companies, and they don't have the exact same name, but for the customer outside experience, they actually look like one entity. But I backed out of that on February 1st this year, 2018, and went full-time game design. So I don't have any involvement in it any longer. We've also now actually managed to sign the final documents, etc. So
that is great. Congratulations. I mean, you guys are full-time sidekicks now. Like, I feel like I should just refer to you as like Robin and Aqualad from this point on.
I'm Robin. You can be Aqualad, Daniel.
Hey, Aqualad is cool. Don't be dissing on Garth. I mean, he's got some things going for him. Okay, well, there's so many things that I want to talk about here. I mean, the political science thing, the working for the government. I mean, I'm a government employee here in Alaska, and I don't really have dreams of, well, I should say I have dreams of becoming a full-time podcaster, but I think that there's even less money in podcasting about board games than there is in designing board games. So I don't have any, I guess, a misunderstanding or high hopes of transitioning my career. But fortunately, I have a really fulfilling career within the government of working with like foster children and adoptions and that kind of stuff. So I'm lucky in that I'm a government employee with actually like a really engaging and cool career. Now, as far as the other thing that I want to know about is, you're talking about setting up this game store and this distribution company in Denmark, and what's the gaming scene like there in Denmark, or even specifically Copenhagen? Like, have board games been really well established there for a long time? Does it have spillover popularity from the boom of German games? Is Games Workshop a big presence over there? Like, tell me all about it.
I think Games Workshop is on your table, Asger.
That for sure is. I can grab this. What I skipped in my own origin story of how I arrived where I am today is that before spending all those years in university, I moved 2 years to England, and actually worked at Games Workshop HQ in Nottingham.
Oh, in the belly of the beast.
Exactly, and of course, before that and after that, the total years, I think Warhammer Fantasy Battle consumed 15 years of my life, where that was my hobby, right? It was not board games or anything else. It was Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Played Magic the Gathering a bit before that, but Warhammer became like the youth hobby that went all the way into the late 20s, and then I stopped.
Quick aside, who's your favorite faction or race for the Warhammer Fantasy fans out there?
But I did play everything in existence. I think that what I probably preferred, it would be Dark Elves or Tomb Kings.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
But we're talking. But right now, it's a different game and it's a different setting, etc. So I don't even know what they're called today, to be honest.
Yeah, but there are other people listening who have fond memories of the past, and like I've been hanging out in comic and game shops since, like, I don't know, when I first moved to Alaska at 1994-ish, around there. So, I remember picking up some of those high elf boxes, with my big brother. I couldn't paint them. I couldn't figure out the rules or anything, but he was like, you know what, let's pick out some figurines for you too. And then he and I learned Magic together back in the old days. Like, I was coming in on Revised and that kind of stuff. So hearing about this kind of stuff, it brings joys to my heart, even if Warhammer right now is a completely different game. But anyway, I'm interrupting your answering of a question with another question to give commentary about a question. So please go on. What's going on in Copenhagen with the gaming scene there?
You asked if gaming is established in Copenhagen and Denmark, and it is, but it isn't. It's kind of similar to the story. People mostly play games from when they were kids or their parents were kids. So Monopoly and the Mod Partiti and that kind of games. But over the last few years, there has been really a growth in interest from people playing games. Especially, you can see that we have one of the largest board game cafes here in Copenhagen called Bastard Cafe. It's really a good place to go, and you can go in there every single weekday afternoon, and it's just crowded, and there are people playing all sorts of games and having fun. So it's really a good sign of growth and interest happening in Copenhagen. So there's kind of a lot going on in the last few years. And it's also, you can see that spill over into people want to take interest in board games and actually how to make them and design them. So we have also a very good and growing community of board game designers here.
What he said.
Yeah, ditto what he said. Okay, carrying on to the more modern stuff, the recent stuff. So Panic Mansion, and again, that's Shaky Manor for the US audience here. It was nominated for a Spiel, won. Again, congratulations. You guys are just busting out these games and they're getting all these accolades here. But also too, what was that like being nominated for a Spiel? Did that have a big impact on you? Did you notice a surge of interest?
Yes, and yes, and yes. It was fantastic. It was, of course, a great honor. There are so many games they look at, and picking out one that we made was quite amazing. Of course, as always, when you make it that far, you have to give a lot of credit to the publisher, Blue Orange Games, because one thing is the game design idea, but it rarely can stand absolutely alone. So the production they did on this and the development they did on it, etc., made it what it is. Also made it what it is. We decided to travel to the ceremony. We are in Denmark, in Copenhagen. So I think it was, what is it, Daniel? A 4-hour train drive, a 3-hour train drive down to Hamburg.
Yeah.
About that. And there was a ceremony there. So we were actually sitting when they were announcing. We weren't watching live on some Facebook page or something. So Daniel couldn't sit still. He brought an apple that he was fiddling with for, I think, 1.5 hours or so, just throwing it from one hand to another. It's true. It's a great honor. It was fantastic being nominated. It, of course, makes an influence on sales. And we also experienced that publishers started taking more of an interest and actually reaching out to us just of the nomination. So a great boon, very proud of it. Don't know if you have anything to add, Daniel.
Oh, but definitely, but it's just a few months since, so I'm sure we'll see a lot of that in the few months and years as well. So it's very recent actually being nominated for the Kinderspiel, and it was a fun experience in Hamburg, and I may have been a bit nervous, especially in the morning. I remember picking up that apple from the breakfast buffet, intending to actually eat it, but I really couldn't, so I just walked around with it, and I didn't know what to do with it, and then I promised not bringing it on stage when we were up on stage. So that was kind of the important job I had here at the ceremony, to remember to put the apple down when we were actually getting up on stage.
That's awesome. And it's like the board game Oscars, it's something that people care about, and it's prestigious and cool. And I was talking to Matthias Nadi of Frosted Games about the Spiel and just how big of a deal it is, one, to get nominated, but also to be the winner of the Spiel. Is there's such a huge amount of people that will solely buy something strictly based off of it being the Spiel winner. They may just say, the one board game that I buy my kids every year, or that I buy for the family every year, is going to be the latest Spiel winner, and I'm just going to assume that that's the easiest way of defining what a good game to bring to the house is. And I didn't realize, because I'm so immersed in the board game world where I'm, reading all these reviews, I'm writing reviews, I'm talking with people and getting recommendations, that the Spiel is a cool honor for me, but it's more like something that's a way of recognizing the designers and the publishers and all the creative hands that go into something. But I don't know that for the hardcore hobbyist, so to speak, that the Spiel is going to be the thing that defines whether or not someone has an inherent interest in a game. But for the broad mass market appeal, like that's such a big thing. And just that initial attention of being nominated is so cool and such an honor. And I'm excited for you guys. Like, this story is very compelling.
Thank you. And I think you're absolutely right that if you are like a gamer like myself, I do my own research for which games I would like to buy, and I consider myself knowledgeable about the subject. And that's exactly who is not the target audience of the Spiel, as you say, right. Because it is the people who walk into a store. Maybe they don't even play games themselves, but they know of friends that do play games and they want to buy them a present. So where do they go? They go to this trusted logo that they have seen for 30 or 40 years. Yeah. So I think it's a big part of actually what has made Germany such a big board game nation over these last more than 30 years.
Well, you guys have designed some notably awesome games for, well, I guess all audience types, but you also have a couple of specific games that are really suitable for younger kids, including, I should say, Frog Riders, which is a game that last year I went to Dice Tower Con, and Stronghold Games is always at Dice Tower Con because Stephen Bonacore and Tom Vassell have their whole frenemy relationship. And so I go there and I check out the booth for Stronghold Games, and I had just done an interview with Stephen Bonacore. I asked him to tell me about some of the new games there. Now that I was meeting him face to face, which was great. And he showed me some cool stuff, and he shows me Frog Riders. And I was like, oh man, I really like the artwork on this. This seems like, some real fairy tale type of, art that you don't typically see as much of anymore. Everything is so high fantasy oriented that there's a little less whimsical fairy tale stuff that's in this kind of pop culture media. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. And he's like, yeah, it's this cool game that's kind of like a kid's abstract game, but at the same time, it's really satisfying for adults. And I was like, you know what? I'll check out a copy at the library. And my group of 4 guys that were playing together, I think we played it twice. And then we brought it back to the library. And then the next day we were like, you know what? We should play that game again. And we immediately got it and played it like 3 more times. It was honestly the like takeaway of favorite games from Dice Tower Con were Ethnos and Frog Riders. And this was all adults, and we loved that game. It just had such a charm and appeal to it, and it felt like it had this dynamic tactical system that reminded me of something like 5 Tribes, where every turn you're assessing what the best possible thing that you could do now, both for immediate gain and long-term gain. It's a really dynamic and cool game. So first off, I just have to gush about Frog Riders a little bit because no one's talking about Frog Riders, or at least in this space, I don't think anyone's talking about Frog Riders nearly as much as it should.
So we need people to go out and buy Frog Riders, or at least try Frog Riders.
Yes. I highly recommend that people go out, check it out. Unfortunately, I haven't done a review of it. Right here, right now, I'm evangelizing for Frog Riders and telling people that if you want a game that is fantastic for kids, but is also just a really charming theme, lightweight game that can be played in like 30 minutes, that has kind of the same mental space as something like Five Tribes-ish, then check out Frog Riders. It's very cool.
You asked me early to correct you if you made if there was anything that I thought was off before we started recording, and I think that actually the comparison to Five Tribes is a little bit off. There are some in the mental capacity of it actually being an abstract game, but I think when you mentioned Ethnos, I think it's more on point with the experience of it, because Five Tribes is known for actually being this borderline AP inducing game, and Ethnos is known for this extremely snappy gameplay that if you don't watch out, it might be your turn again just after you took your turn, right? Because it moves that fast.
Right.
And I think Frog Riders is actually in that first category. When you say it can be played in half an hour, if you play 2 players, it can be played in 15 minutes, right? It's a very, very fast and snappy game, but still with lots of decisions in it.
Yeah. I guess I'm comparing it to Five Tribes in the way that, like, Five Tribes is one of my favorite games, and the positioning of the board and assessing things and kind of measuring your instinct is one of my favorite aspects of that game. And it's funny because I totally see why it's such an AP prone game, this analysis paralysis of looking at all the different combinations out there. But, in a way, everyone has their own game that they feel kind of naturally good at. I don't know that I'm amazing at Five Tribes or anything, but I think to like Star Wars Episode 1 where it's like, feel, don't think or something. I don't actually think too hard about everything. I go on instinct. Like I feel like this is going to be a good move here. I've kind of assessed the board and I'm not going to start crunching numbers. I'm just going to go with my instinct of what's going to be the best way. But yeah, Frog Riders is snappy and it is fast and it's not overwhelming with information. But it does have a lot of really cool decisions to be made.
I just think maybe now is the time for me to step in and correct Asger a bit, because Frog Riders, the first idea for the game that became Frog Riders was mine. I remember exactly, I had it riding my bike here in Copenhagen and thinking about how to make a game around this abstractist peg solitaire idea, and I took a lot of inspiration actually in the first idea from a game like Frog Riders in
Five Tribes.
In the way the system is, right? So when you look at the board, it's abstracted movement on the board. Each frog there are different colors, like in Five Tribes, there are different colors that have different abilities depending on how you pick them up, when and where, and also the idea that when you start the game, you look at the board, there are frogs all over, like in Five Tribes. It's just, the board is just full, and there's so many possibilities. So you look at a full board, and as you play, you kind of pick up a lot of the frogs, so you narrow the decision space as you move. So a lot of that, there are definitely comparisons to Five Tribes and to a game like Five Tribes. It's not the only one that where I found some inspiration for the game initially, but I understand the link, and I had it myself in the first idea for the game, and then it developed there.
And it really became its own thing. Like it is definitely not like my first Five Tribes or something like that. I don't want to give that impression. It is its own thing, but it occupies a similar space, but it does have that snappy nature that Asger was mentioning. But I guess to get to the question that I really wanted to ask is, like, what are some of the best and worst things about working on a game where you know that this is going to be playable by younger audiences? Like, do you find certain challenges or certain rewards in working on a game that kids can play?
There's one big advantage, which is also a disadvantage, it can be at least in designing games for kids. It is that they have to be simple games, right? They have to be simple concepts. I know that there's extra cards, etc. in Frog Riders, which is even a family weight game, I'd probably say, but family from 8 years and up. But if you're talking real kids games from 6 years or maybe even younger, then they have to be extremely simple, which The advantage is that makes them easy to design if you have the right idea. The disadvantage is that you really have to knock it out of that park on that core idea that the game gets built around. Because if you don't, you get something that's overly complicated and moves it towards a family game. So even if you have something that becomes complicated, doesn't mean it's a waste of design exercise. It just means that it sometimes moves from being a children's game to being a family game. For example, Shaky Manor or Panic Mansion, that game Daniel showed to me, and I think that often we show designs to each other, and when that happens, we kind of evaluate, is that something we should proceed working on? And I think within 30 seconds or a minute or so of playing that first prototype, I said, of course we're going to do this, because it was such a simple, straight core idea that you could envision it being playable by kids immediately and still being fun. Daniel, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. So what Asger says is, if when we have a good idea for a game and think, oh, this is really interesting, we often look at to see, is it interesting enough? How does it compare to the other ideas? Is there a target for it? Who's going to publish it? Who's going to play it? Is it a kids game or a family game, or is it more gamers game? And when you kind of scale down the core idea into a kids game, you actually often have to take stuff out of it, and at the risk of actually removing what's interesting for the game, actually removing that. So I think there's a fallacy I've been in, and a trap I fall into earlier when we are thinking about concepts for kids, and that is that when you kind of think that the kids games needs to be simple, and Asger is correct, they really need to, but the problem is it's not just that. What you have left needs to be compelling, and it must really have a toy factor as well for the kids. So there are a lot of stuff you need to put into very few components. So it's often like the easy solution to say, okay, we'll just take this out and it's a kids game. But then the next question is it still fun? Did we remove what was the core experience? How do you manage that? So I think that process of stripping down family games to kids games could actually end up making the game a lot worse and not that interesting for kids games.
Yeah. This is interesting because you two are bouncing off of one another, reverberating off of one another so much, and how you're presenting the games to one another. It really is creating this mental picture of this true partnership that you guys have that is really it's really awesome. Can you tell me about like one thing of note that each of you have like learned about designing games from one another? Something that you wouldn't have initially thought, that either right away or even after working together for so many years, that you've started to realize, like, hey, this person is rubbing off on me and I'm learning from them.
I can try to answer it in a slightly different way. I think I can tell you what Daniel is definitely better at than me, and that doesn't mean that I have learned it. Is that an okay answer?
Oh, by all means. No, that's a perfect answer. Please praise one another. That would be a great way.
So sit back for an hour or two.
Okay. Yep,
no. It'll be 10 seconds. No.
The first is football.
No, he hasn't touched it. The second is soccer. He hasn't touched a football in 20 years. I think I could beat him now. No chance. No, Daniel is compared to me, he's an idea guy and he's a mechanic first guy, right? So when I've been away on holiday, or he's been on holiday or something, he can turn up and he shows me something that he's thought about, and it can be something quite. The core of it can be quite abstract, mechanical, right? And he spits them out. There can be 10 in a quick succession. We've gotten better at making them in focusing on the great ones. But I think that has also been part of my role in helping Daniel, has been to sorting through these ideas. But he's definitely more of a guy who sits down and thinks about some specific mechanics and says, how could I use this to build a game? So like from scratch, something new. I'm much more derivative, if you want to use that word, not a negative way, but like all love stories are derivative of Romeo and Juliet, etc. That I look at something existing and I say, how can I tweak that? How can I make that different? How can I change that up and simply make it, in my opinion, better if there are some aspects of it I don't prefer. But it's not like blank slate out of the blue, and it's not as many ideas as he has. So, Daniel, talk to you. Tell me how great I am now.
This is going to take like 10 seconds.
I think now that we work together in board games for quite a lot of years now, I think we're kind of building a common language of games. And when I look back 5 years when we started doing it together, I think we were really on an equal footing on a lot of the ideas about how to make games and what we wanted from the games and how we wanted to, when we play tested a very rough prototype, how we wanted to find the fun in the game and actually make it better and iterate. So I think we had that core idea and work ethics to begin with, and now I think we've just developed a language how to talk to each other about that. And I think working with Asger has helped a lot in building that. Also, when I have these ideas, when I have these new compelling ideas, I would tend to just sit down and actually make a prototype and just play it myself or toss it in front of people and actually play it, regardless of that idea actually being better than the idea I had the day before. So I think that rush of having an idea and actually seeing, okay, this is an interesting game, how do I make that? I still get that all the time, but I think working with Asger has kind of helped sitting back a bit and maybe not just make that prototype all the time, but then at least scribble down the notes on the phone, and when we meet next time, talk about them and see what we actually have to do. So there's definitely some sorting out of what games to make and why is this more interesting than the other, and letting not always being carried away with the good idea, but also understanding how does this work as a game concept and where are the weak spots. And it's like kind of falling in love. You don't see all the weak spots and all the but ifs when you just have the idea. So it's definitely improving that strategizing about what to work with and when and where. So
it keeps things in perspective.
And definitely from working with Asger, but it's also from not actually sitting and figuring out all these stuffs, these things alone. So I think
one thing where I know that I'm actually better than Daniel, because now I'll praise myself, is that he's better at soccer and football. But for example, we're working on a dungeon crawl game, and as soon as we enter any space of fantasy, etc., I have actually had to sit down and explain Daniel that an elf is faster than an orc.
Oh, right? No, Daniel, come on.
So these basic fantasy tropes and understanding of the environment, etc., he's of no use whatsoever. He can tell you how to dribble around someone in soccer, but speeds of or basic like old role playing magic spells, etc., the names of them, what they would do, all this he is the blank slate.
That's awesome.
So now we are back to the origin story we started with. Actually I'm coming into board games without a background in Magic. I've never played that, never played an RPG, and really never read or watched a lot of fantasy stuff. So I think I'm kind of an outlier in that regard.
Yeah, I think so. Or at least for maybe a gamer or a game designer of a certain generation, you might be an outlier, because I feel like for the most part, all these things were part of a similar package, at least in the United States. You know, like if you were reading comic books, then it's most likely that you're probably also somewhat into Magic, or at least you know all the Magic players and you're hanging out with them, and then you're also into Warhammer, or you're listening to the like hard rock and heavy metal and that kind of stuff. Like, all of it was part of a similar package, maybe until the later 90s, when it started reaching into these different niches and subgenres and different fandoms, and now, you know, they can be completely independent. You can be a board game player, and you know, you have a million games that are available for you, and not a single one of them has to take place in space or in some fantasy world derivative of Tolkien. Like, you have the options there.
Exactly.
Well, I could talk to you guys all day and well, I guess all night in my regard, because it's late at night, and I'm sure the audience is also like, man, Jack is sounding really tired, because you know, we got time differences here. I mentioned it earlier, but I could keep talking to you guys about just like your relationship and the friendship and the playful nature that you guys have with yourself. But I really do want to get onto one last topic of like the things that you have on the horizon. So you mentioned this dungeon crawl game, and then you also have Tale of Pirates coming on. So the Tale of Pirates is coming to the US. What's your nutshell pitch for, like, what is this game and why is it cool?
It is a fantastic co-op game. It's a real-time co-op game, but it is something we call turn-based real-time, even if that is an oxymoron.
Yeah, that sounds confusing already.
But it uses sand timers. It was released the same time as, I think actually Kitchen Rush made it a little earlier. But had its main release at Essen last year. And what we do is that we basically have a worker. Each player around the table has a worker, which is a sand timer. And you place that worker on a worker placement spot, and you do the action connected to that spot.
That's amazing. That is brilliant.
So every 30 seconds you have to move them around. And since it's a co-op, you don't get in. You do get in each other's way. You're actually you're sailing a 3D pirate ship. I think it's about 10, 12 inches tall with the mast when it goes into the air. It has a sail and it's got cannons on the sides, and you swirl it around. You shoot cannons at the Spanish fleet trying to hunt you down. You try to rob mercenaries, and there's a big campaign of 10 scenarios where you unlock new content as you proceed. So I don't want to spoil too much of what is happening in it. There's a fantastic app that goes along with it. I think it's a really, I would have used the word unique and innovative, etc. But of course, there was this issue of co-design that at the same time someone else had the same idea and also worked on it. But I don't think it makes any of the games less unique or innovative. But yeah, I think it's really worth checking out. It's a good family weight game, which gradually ramps up complexity because of the campaign proceeding. You get more stuff, unlock things, find new monsters and enemies to fight.
And who's publishing that in the US?
I cannot remember. Can you, Daniel?
But the publisher in Europe is Granerud Creation, and I think I'm not sure. I think they're partnering with a distribution channel. So maybe was it Line Ramparts? Maybe. I'm not sure.
Well, Asger took over the Tale of Pirates. So again, in a nutshell, to the degree that you can at least share anything. Daniel, tell me, what is this dungeon crawl? Because you're the sweet, innocent baby entering into this fantasy world. What is this dungeon crawl?
So I'll just say orc and just leave it at that, and then go to what's the core. So there's a lot I can't say. There's a lot I can't say about this game. It's not announced. I've probably posted a lot of pictures on Twitter about it, so it's not like it's totally secret, but still.
It has been signed. There is a contract. It's coming on Kickstarter in a year's time, so the end of 2019.
And we'll talk a lot about it in the next year, but For now,
Yes.
what I can say is, in A Tale of Pirates, now I'll just start with that. A Tale of Pirates, when Asger says there are 10 different chapters, there are 10 different experiences in the box. Here, I saw somebody review that and say that they played Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and they kind of, the experience here was the story. The story was the important part that drove them through all the games, because gameplay-wise, they're kind of similar from start to end. And in A Tale of Pirates, it's much more about finding the new experience, new stuff you have to work around. So it's not as story-driven. It's more like build up mechanically. What kind of monsters and what kind of missions are you going on? So more like new experiences in a box.
Wow.
And for the new dungeon crawl, we are trying to actually do a bit of both. So the vision is, imagine a Netflix show where the game is a Netflix show and there are different episodes you go into. But and then imagine you could actually kind of, the choices you make in the game decides what order you watch or play the different episodes in the Netflix series. So on the macro level, that's kind of what we are how we're trying to build a story into it. So,
can I try to give an example?
Sure.
Okay. Have you played Time Stories or seen Time Stories?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And you know of the Choose Your Own Adventure books that are also being like reinvented today, but of the 80s?
Yeah.
As well? Okay. I think that what we are trying to do with the campaign element is combining those two things. Combining the Time Story experience with a Choose Your Own Adventure experience. Where Time Stories is actually, and this is what I'm talking about here, is this is the campaign part of the game. On top of that, there's the whole dungeon crawl, which we really, really like and think it's great as well. But this is just a campaign in between those games. So imagine that you're seeing the visual panorama of the place you're visiting, like in Time Stories, and you have to make choices about where to go, and those choices matter. And there is like a choose your own adventure path through this story that lies beneath it. So you could even return to the same place again later, and it might be different. It might have been raided by barbarians, or it might be more prosperous than ever, depending on which paths you chose previously in the campaign.
That's awesome. Like, the connective tissue between game to game is one of the things that is often sorely missing, and having like narrative hooks and mechanical hooks. Dungeon crawls are something near and dear to my heart, as like with many, many, many people out there, like Hero Quest was like a foundational aspect of my childhood for my brother and I. And to have something that is imaginative and as I guess encouraging to imaginative play, not just imaginative in its setting, is something that I'm really looking forward to every time that I crack into a new dungeon crawl. So, you know, I'm really interested, based off of your guys' history, based off of the differences in what each of you bring to the table, especially with Daniel not knowing what he's getting into with all of this awesome fantasy stuff, and then, you know, Asger's over here just over gushing about, well, technically, these aren't elves, these are dark elves, so they have different aspects to them.
Actually, a quick side story to it is that we actually made the initial prototype with completely standard fantasy tropes, right? But we actually decided to make a change and go with anthropomorphic animals. And one of the reasons was exactly Daniel knowing nothing about what was going on. Because our feeling is that everyone might not know that an elf is fast and light of feet, but everyone more or less knows that a cat is.
Oh, that sounds so cool. This sounds great.
So basically, instead of tapping into the fantasy tropes that some of us understand, we're trying to tap into the cultural understanding of animals, which is a lot broader for every audience around. So that's some of the idea of where we've moved it. Plus, it's actually a quite fantastic setting we're working on, in my opinion, but that's a whole different story. We'll talk about that next time we're on.
As long as this gets me one step closer to my dream of like a big budget Thundercats board game, then I'm in good shape.
Yes.
All right. Well, you guys are awesome. The whole Sidekick Studios, Sidekick Games, I guess, is just amazing. What you guys have accomplished so far and all the things that you have on the horizon are awesome. Everyone in the audience, go out and check out Frog Riders. If there's any takeaway that I can make sure that you do, is you check that out. And also, I just Googled some pictures of Tale of Pirates, and that thing is freaking amazing. And think about your workers being little sand timers. That's awesome. So thank you guys so much for coming on to the Cardboard Herald. And I am hoping that 1 year from now, you and I, the three of us, we are talking about this incredible sounding dungeon crawl that you have on the horizon. So thanks again for coming on the show, guys.
Thank you for having us, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cardboard Herald. As always, everything we do is ad-free and audience-supported. If you'd like to help keep it that way, find the Patreon link at the top of our webpage, cardboardherald.com. We have several levels of support with various rewards. If you enjoyed the show, we do a whole bunch of other stuff, including reviews, interviews, and recommendations across writing, podcasts, and video. You can find that on our YouTube channel or by visiting any of our social media or our website. So with that out of the way, thank you again for listening to the Cardboard Herald.